Good morning, folks. Tara Bachland here with the Wifey Wake Up No Makeup podcast. And X is not wanting us to go live once again. Oh, well. So, good morning, everybody. Sorry for getting started a little bit late, but it'll be 6 a.m. ish that we'll be getting started. I want to make sure that, of course, I have my thoughts together before we get started. So, yeah, we'll see you around 6 a.m.-ish Central Time every morning. Well, today I'd like to talk about clingy, distant, crazy. You might have been called to any of these things, or you might have someone in your life that you would kind of categorize as distant, clingy, or crazy. And it might not actually be the case, right? A lot of the times a person is reacting. So let me back up a step. So the wifey schools, tons of things that I wish I had known earlier. I've been married for going on 24 years. We're in our 24th year of marriage now. And these are things that I just wish I had known earlier. Because a lot of times when you come up to a challenge in life, you're just kind of dumbfounded. Usually early on in the life, you just kind of feel like, wow, you might not even question what's wrong. It's just like, oh, I'm coming up against this problem. And it may be due to something that can be explained, something that there's a solution for. And oftentimes I hear when this issue is being talked about, my significant other or my girlfriend or boyfriend is clingy, or they're distant, or they're crazy. Well, that doesn't usually come up right away in the relationship when things are going great, right? It usually comes up later when there's some kind of challenge. And then the issue really is revealed, right? It's not until we put stress on something or we get past that honeymoon phase that we see the issues. And it doesn't mean that it's a deal breaker, but it might. So I want to share something that was very enlightening to me. And it was more so enlightening, especially in my outer relationships and within myself. So this goes to explain attachment theory. And John and I talked about this in our podcast. We have a couples podcast as well, John Tare podcast, that we do each week. And we were watching a short in which the person was talking about a concept of attachment theory, but it wasn't necessarily revealed as attachment theory. Now, it is a psychological concept, but anyone can grasp it. It's really, really fascinating. And that's why I'm bringing it up. You don't have to be a psychologist or a professional counselor in order to grasp it and really utilize what the benefits of the knowledge of attachment theory. So I'm going to read just a little bit about it from Wikipedia. And attachment theory is a psychological and evolutionary theory concerning relationships between humans. The most important tenet is that young children need to develop a relationship with at least one primary caregiver for their survival and to develop healthy social and emotional functioning. The theory was formulated by psychiatrist and psychoanalyst John Bowlby, 1907 to 1990. Now, in my podcast with John the other day, I'd incorrectly given credit to, well, I actually didn't name her because I couldn't remember her name, but a lot of research was later done by developmental psychologist Mary Ainsworth in the 1960s and 70s. So I'll read a little bit more. Within attachment theory, infant behavior associated with attachment is primarily the seeking of proximity to an attachment figure in stressful situations. And so we're going to come back to this. This is why it tends to show up in your relationship, of course, then when you're under stress. Infants become attached to adults who are sensitive and responsive in social interactions with them and who remain as consistent caregivers for some months during the period 6 months to 2 years of age. During the latter part of this, children begin to use attachment figures as a secure base to explore from and return to. Parental responses lead to the development of patterns of attachment. So it's how the parent responds that leads to the development of these patterns of attachment. These in turn lead to internal working models that will guide the individual's feelings, thoughts, and expectations in later relationships. Separation anxiety or grief following the loss of an attachment figure is considered to be a normal and adaptive response for an attached infant. These behaviors may have evolved because they increase the probability of survival. A little bit more here. There's so much more. I encourage you to read about it if it's at all interesting or hitting home. Research by developmental psychologist Mary Ainsworth in the 1960s and 70s underpinned basic concepts and topics relative to maternal responsiveness and sensitivity to infant distress. She introduced the concept of the secure base and developed a theory of attachment patterns in infants, secure attachment, avoidant attachment, and anxious attachment. A fourth pattern, disorganized attachment, was identified later. In the 1980s, the theory was extended to attachment in adults. Other interactions may be construed as including components of attachment behavior. These include peer relationships at all ages, romantic and sexual attraction, and responses to the care needs of infants or the sick and the elderly. Like I said, there's a lot to read about this. I'm reading from Wikipedia at the moment, and I had first heard about it. I think I had heard about it like you hear about so many things in relationships, like I put in the title, clingy, distant, crazy. You hear about it by the symptoms, and then someone finally gives a name and a source to that, and then I read some books about it. That's why I credit it largely to Mary Ainsworth rather than the earlier founder, John Bowlby. I believe is because Mary Ainsworth did a significant amount of work, at least in my learning about it, and in my mind I credit it to her. But it's really fascinating, the studies they did with children and how they came to these conclusions, or at least the theories, right? Not necessarily conclusions, but boy, does it make a lot of sense. So for example, if someone is, for example, here are some attachment theory labels. Now, I'm not a huge fan of labels, but it can provide some insight. So what we're aiming for, ideally, we have secure attachment. As a child, as the infant really, when our primary caregiver leaves, we can recognize that they're leaving. We might get a little fussy now, but we don't throw a total fit. Or when they leave, we recognize and we acknowledge them, but again, we don't become overly attached by grabbing onto them, or conversely, just totally ignoring them when they arrive. And so there's a healthy and happy medium of secure attachment where you recognize that this person is leaving or returning, but it's not on the extremes. And those extremes can be, now this is the terms that they use for adults, how it shows up in adults: anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, avoidant, fearful, avoidant. I believe there are several more. It kind of depends on who you're talking to. I got this from the Wikipedia article. But let's just go into the terms that I grabbed and I used in the title for today. Speaking of in between, my hair is kind of in between. It's not really straight and it's not wavy. It's kind of a weird in between. So forgive me if I'm playing with it a lot. Clingy. So that would be a person who's very attached. They're insecure. Now, I might not be using the right words here. I'm just using like colloquial ways of explaining things. But a person who's clingy, who anticipates you leaving even before you leave and already starts getting anxious, that can go back to an attachment theory style. Distant, someone who, and again, this is triggered by stress, who they feel like you might feel like they're pushing you away, or they just remove themselves from the situation when things get stressful. Some of these words actually typically are associated with one sex or another, but it's not. I mean, So typically when we hear the word clingy, we think of a woman, right? But a guy can certainly be clingy as well. When we hear distant, we think of the man who's iconically going to his man cave or to the garage, right? But a woman can also be distant. The reason I use the word crazy is because usually the person who has those both extremes is seen as crazy. It's like a push-pull kind of relationship. They had a very unstable relationship with their primary caregiver. They did not have that stability of care, and therefore do not feel that security within themselves. What's normal to them is actually to have distance or extreme proximity, and so they will push pull that feels normal to them. Again, I'm not a counselor, but this is definitely something that I've read a lot about. I have seen, experienced. It's really fascinating, and I believe, this is my own opinion, that we can all experience a degree of this, right? I mean, we're very fortunate if we grew up in an environment where we can learn secure attachment, where our primary caregiver is there, is reliable. And not only there and reliable, but when we need comfort, when we need care, they're not only there, but they're consistently there. They are not too clingy themselves, nor are they too distant. There's a nice balance between the two. And, we're really fortunate if we grow up with that. If we didn't grow up with that, which I think many of us don't, just being aware, just knowing where you fall on that fall on that scale can be super, super helpful. So I, for example, tend to be a little bit more distant. If something is challenging to me, someone is challenging to me, I want to back away. And so I tend to gravitate towards people or attract people who might be a little bit more clingy. That can be a little bit of that can create the nice tension in a relationship of the opposites attract in the relationship. Too much of that, of course, then you start triggering each other. So, for example, if my husband and I are having a disagreement, if John and I need to discuss something, my tendency is to want to pull back. I might think that I'm regrouping, collecting my thoughts and so forth, but it also may be a safety mechanism that I'm reacting to. And he, on the other hand, is one to more come forward and say, let's talk. We need to sort this out. We can't go to bed angry, that sort of thing. And that's very productive in our relationship to that degree. I would say it's not to a degree, if we're very stressed, which we've had very stressed times in our life, we tend to, I tend to pull away. And that is not helpful for the relationship, because then I'm not communicating. I'm not being there and with him. And I'm not going to say he's clingy. I'm just saying he's a little bit more on the end of wanting time, wanting connection. And so that's, I would say, a healthier point on that scale, right? It's not to the clingy side, but maybe someone who just likes connection. You might be attracting yourself to the person, might be naturally attracted to the person who is a little bit more distant. Like I said, that creates kind of that opposites attract kind of attention. But just be aware that when you are stressed or the relationship is stressed, you'll tend to go to the more extreme sides of those of that scale, and it can actually be more destructive than that healthy attraction. So it's really, really fascinating. There are assessments out there that you can take. I would also say, from past experience of doing all sorts of assessments like these, be careful about going too far and making it your story. Find out enough just to inform yourself, just to know, okay, what's going on in me. Be careful about diagnosing others and telling others where they're at, what they want to do. Here's a great lesson that I've been contemplating still. It's a lesson for me, is what I should say. They say that, the wife is the neck in the relationship, right? And so she and the man is the head, being the leader, head of the household, but the woman is the neck. And of course, the neck is what dictates where the head is looking, right? And it's a neat way to look at things, but it can be difficult to grasp because it's like, okay, how do I, as a wife, turn the head? What does that mean in actual life? So I'm going to share something that, because this is still being revealed to me. I think I do it naturally in some instances. In some instances, I'm still learning. But here would be a good instance. So instead of coming back to your significant other or husband and saying, I'm this, and then, or even worse, you're that, and you need to change that, I would share, or what I've done in the past is just say, I started learning about this new theory, this new concept. It's super fascinating. And yeah, share about yourself, about what you learned about yourself. And that's kind of turning the head in a direction and getting him to look at something that may be new to him as well. And then you can have a conversation about it. If you come out of the gate and say, I learned about this theory, or like I said, worse yet, you're like, you are a distant attachment, and that's why we have so much problem, because you're always going to your man cave when we have an issue. What I've done naturally and sometimes had to really consciously think about is sharing about from my own perspective. This is something that I just learned, something I just experienced. And that can be really helpful so that the other person, even if it's a friend, doesn't feel defensive. Because we're talking about, deep-seated patterns, right? And emotions. And so it can be triggering on multiple levels. So there you go. That's a huge tidbit. Wish I had known about that a couple decades ago. And I'm fortunate, I'm grateful that I did learn about it. Because it's been so insightful, and mostly for catching myself, even in business, whether it's a personal one-on-one relationship or business relationship, just noticing my own patterns of pulling away was super interesting too. Okay, one more thing. I know I'm going over my usual 15 minutes, but it's so fascinating. My husband and I would talk about in our podcast, John and Tara podcast, that we bring up a lot of martial arts analogies. That's how I first met him. We trained, he was my instructor in martial arts. And, we joke about Karate Kid, right? And for decades, people have referenced Karate Kid. But it's true. It's just true. And you may experience this. Maybe you're a dancer. Anything you do physically that can take you out of your mind. See how your body naturally responds. And that will indicate to you what your ingrained natural responses are. So how you train, how it shows up in your training will indicate like your more natural internal responses. So in this sense, the avoidant pattern shows up for me in training where I might not want to challenge myself. Now, there's something in my personality where I do challenge myself, but it's more so like in the acute scenario, my tendency would be to retreat or retract, where another person might be to advance. And neither is necessarily better. It depends on the circumstance. So knowing yourself, understanding the circumstance can be super helpful in reacting appropriately for the time and for the circumstance. Okay, if I keep on going, I'm going to keep on going. But those are some great nuggets to think about during the day, and definitely look up Attachment Theory. It's super fascinating. There are great books out there, and I'm sure you'll be glad you did. Make sure to like, subscribe, share if you found this helpful. Maybe if a friend came to mind, go ahead and please share that with them. This is Wifey Wake Up podcast, Wifey Wake Up with no makeup, and not doing my hair either. And every morning at 6 a.m. ish. And look forward to seeing you here. Have a great day, everybody. Take care. Oh, we're still going live. I swear I hit that end stream. Okay. Have a great day again. Bye-bye, everybody.